We'll open the work session of the Pinehurst Village Council for February 14th, 2023. We have two topics on the agenda, but we're going to add a few others. And insofar as I know, they would be the following. I'll have a few comments on the development of relations with Dornoch. Jane has some comments following up on the meeting with the County Commissioners Task Force on, I think, water particularly. Jane, correct? And there are some questions perhaps about land and its use on Rattlesnake Road in the village of Pinehurst. Do you want to define that a little further?
Library location.
Library location, yeah. So with that, we'll go back to the first two items listed on the agenda, which would be item number 2 to start with. It's a timeline for the initiative action plans. I think this stems, Patrick, from questions you had a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And would we like to proceed? Jeff, do you have any comments to proceed? We'll just
No, I was just going to say that this is a follow-up to Patrick's request that you have the opportunity to revisit this before we go neck deep in the SOP development.
Okay, and Matt, thank you for putting such a nice chart together. Take over.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's nice to see you all. So yes, this is in relation to what Council Member Pizzella asked for a couple of meetings ago, or at least last meeting. And this was basically my interpretation of what was requested. So to orient yourself a little bit, this chart, the top section of it, are the initiative action plan items that were discussed during the FY 2024 strategic planning retreat process, including some of those shifts that were made during that time. And then, but when looking at that, sometimes it can get a little difficult, especially with all of the different opportunities for improvement and innovation that we talk about, to see what different phases of those initiative action plan items are going to be and how they relate to each other. And so the first thing that I've tried to do here is show where there are design phases for these projects. If there are non-build activities such as coordination with contract negotiations, if there's policy discussions, et cetera, that would be a non-build activity. And then there are the green elements are those build pieces. That does not mean in this regard that it's only that 1 year. So for instance, in FY 2025 for expand and renovate Gibbon Library and Tufts Archives, currently, as of the discussion in FY 2024, the budget for construction is in FY 2025, but some of that build continues into FY 2026. So again, there's a little bit of leeway that we have to provide here within the context of the grid. And then if there are items, implementation items that come after design or build or what have you within the initiative action plan item, those are in that tan color. So it's kind of providing you a Gantt chart insofar, if you recognize that term, that then also shows the monetary amount associated currently, as of the FY 2024 strategic planning retreat, where those align. Then underneath that, when we were having the conversation about putting this together, we said, well, but there are also other capital projects that don't fall within the initiative action plan list that are rather substantial, that are currently planned over the next 5 years. And so we placed that under the second section for you, just to give you an idea of those other items. And then the total actually puts the total of initiative action plan items and the capital projects together. As you can see, since and as Jeff Sanborn mentioned, we are in the very early stages of the FY 2024 budgetary process. And so those light bluish gray boxes on the bottom right in capital projects are just areas that we just haven't projected yet. More than likely, there are going to be some items there because they're a part of our capital improvement projects, but we just don't know what they are to be able to put those numbers in. So from my discussion, and then I'll turn it over to you all for discussion, was where the build processes were for the initiative action plan items after the FY 2024 strategic planning retreat. And so I think for a potential part of this conversation can start with where those green areas align, where there may be some build elements that cross each other, and where there may be some conversation about where certain items should line up sooner rather than later.
I'm trying to figure out how this differs from when we do our 5-year projection. Because when we do our 5-year projection, let's say, for example, let's look at fiscal year 2027 now. We've got to expand downtown parking. The farther we get out in the 5-year projection, the less certain those things become. But we have to put them there anyway, knowing that as we go from year to year, what may have been under 2027 now either won't be there or be in another year at a different amount. I'm just trying to figure out how this differs, what we're doing here now, differs from what we do when we look at our 5-year projection in what, March, April?
And maybe I'll try to take a stab at answering that question, but for clarification, are you calling attention to the gray boxes at the bottom and wonder why there's not a number there, or?
Well, I'm just looking
In
at all
FY
these.
'28,
I'm looking at all of the IEPs and the capital projects.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the years, knowing that you guys give it your best shot in putting numbers in the later years.
right,
Because we do that in our 5-year projection.
yeah,
But we could look at a 5-year projection last year, and it's going to be, could be pretty different from what we do this year, but it's something we do just to have the projects and the dollars
Right.
before us.
so this isn't, I guess I wouldn't call this different from the 5-year projection. This process is an input to the 5-year projection. So all these, once we solidify, for example, the capital expenses going 5 years out that are on the bottom part of this table, they will be accounted for in that 5-year projection. The same holds true for all these IEP costs that are up here on the top half. They'll
So,
be built into that 5-year
so
plan, if you will.
then what I'm hearing, excuse me, what I'm hearing you say is what we're seeing here is what staff normally does anyway in coming up with our 5-year projection.
Yeah, well, yes, the stuff on the bottom, some of that stuff we got specific input from you during the strategic retreat. Do you want to continue to invest $430,000 a year on stormwater improvements, for example? Streetscape improvements, same thing, walkways and sidewalks. We talked about the West Pinehurst Park
You pushing it
project.
out?
When you get down to fleet replacement, IT replacement, all others, really, we don't bother with you with that, because that's the compilation, the roll-up of a very large number of smaller things that get built into our budgeting process. So we take care of that part. We haven't taken care of it yet for '28, because we're not that far along in the project, in the process. But the stuff on the top half of this table is your guidance to us about where you think these things need to be built into that 5-year plan.
But, and I think we're kind of progressing on the same line of thought. As staff puts numbers in 26, 27, and 8, there's less certainty in those outlying years, but you put them there anyway because we know this is something right now we think we're going to be doing. And
Yeah.
with more time, these become either more certain or less certain.
That's
and
right.
either stay there with a better number or they fall off.
They'll solidify. And you know, I'll use, for example, the expand downtown parking facilities, IAP, as an example here. There have been times in the past where we have taken a look at a project like this one and recognized that, we don't really know what timeline this is going to happen on. We know that it's probably not feasible to happen before about the 27 FY '27 timeline, based on all the moving pieces and negotiations that have to be, you were talking about second, third, fourth party negotiations to make that happen. We know it can't happen before then, but it's such a big bill that we say, okay, we're going to account for it here at the earliest point, recognizing that it might get pushed out.
And it's such a big number, it'd be irresponsible not to put it on there at all.
Sorry?
It is such a big number, it would
That's
be
right, yeah.
irresponsible
Yeah,
not to
we're
put it.
better off putting it on there than not, I think, given the uncertainty.
I guess what I'm seeing is just a little bit more explanation now of what goes into the 5-year projection that we will see when we get to that point. All right, because I don't recall us doing something like this before. and it's been requested, but it seems to me like it's just a part of your normal budgeting process.
Right, it is, but I think to Patrick's point, I mean, that top half in particular, and some of that stuff on the upper half of the bottom part, I mean, that's guidance from the council on what you
Right.
want to see built into this plan. So that's where, you all have to be, or at least with a consensus, or a majority of the council needs to agree with this before we can build the plan.
Right. And I think, not to speak for Pat, because he's about to for himself on this issue, but I think the idea here was that in some folks' minds, there was a need to change the priority and therefore the investment in some projects versus others, given current events over the last few months.
Right.
It's sort of like that. And that's going to lead to input to the current budget, which is being put together. So good time to do it. Does that capture some of the ideas, Pat, on that? Or?
Yeah, I only had a few minor tweaks. I mean, I still have my original notes scribbled out here. I think and actually Jeff stated more eloquently than I'm sure I will, the downtown parking facility expansion it's beyond 26. I'd be shocked if we're there at 26. And so I would rather see us push that out further rather than to unnecessarily whet any appetites and cause any consternation among some people. Whereas the relocation of the public services complex, I've made no secret that I think that is crucial for us to be able to impact the development in Village Place. I'd like to see that move the other direction. I do have a question, and maybe Matt, explain to me again the brown areas, what that's meaning to me, the non-build activity.
Yes. Yes, sir. So we were actually struggling a little bit to find the best term for this because it's kind of a catch-all term. They're essentially items that are a part of the initiative action plans, in some cases that are still a part of the progress, but have nothing directly associated with either the design or the build or the implementation of the initiative action plan. So for instance, looking at the retrofitting current athletic fields with synthetic turf, that's a negative $27,000. That is built into the plan as a cost savings, essentially, from the maintenance cost of implementing the
okay, I
Cannon
get
Park.
I get it.
Yeah, the library is a similar example about the gift or the foundation donation, I believe.
Right, okay. Now,
The-
thank
the
you.
capital campaign.
Capital campaign, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I understand that now. The, I thought, at least my notes, don't know if I got my notes right. Or maybe the water tanks issue, is that in the relocation of public services complex number or not? It's not. Was it in earlier? Did we discuss it somewhere? My notes,
No, what's on the table right now is it's a no-cost or a low-cost swap, a land swap to acquire that. That doesn't mean that we might alternately put a bid in for that property, but it's not tied to the relocation of public services. The outcome we're looking for there is just to be able to be more in control of the execution of our small area plan.
well, again, in my mind, I see moving the downtown parking this way, moving the public services complex this way, because again, I'm speaking for myself, but I think some of my colleagues feel the same way. I think the relocation of the public services complex is much more of a priority than the downtown parking facility, and it's much more realistic because, as Jeff pointed, there's like 4 moving parts for that parking facility, and we own 5.3 acres in that area of Village Place, and the Moore County, I think, has 3 acres. So we're closer to critical mass there of pulling something off, though it's not imminent. But then just last week we made some headway elsewhere on a piece of property. So those are my 2 biggies. I don't the all others column on the bottom there, 301, 360 across, what falls into the all others catch-all?
All others?
Yeah, I know. I'm just wondering.
Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me. We can get that for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd be curious what is, I mean, it's, you know, it's bigger than IT replacement and the streetscape improvements, so it's, you know, it's,
And we just recently had this, new requirement to capitalize our lease arrangements, for example, that,
okay,
that's just one probably small example, but
okay. All right, let me go to the retrofit current athletic fields.
let me put it this way, Patrick. It's a compilation of a whole bunch of very small numbers that you shouldn't even be worried about.
Well, I don't really worry about them. Once I'm aware of them, then I just sort of chalk them up. But,
They're legitimate expenses that just also happen to be classified as capital,
okay, I would be
cost of doing business.
curious, I understand that part. Curious to see them. The retrofit of current athletic fields with synthetic turf. My recollection is they are about to do something over here at Cannon Park, right?
Yes, sir. So
That's-
that's current in FY 2023. That's Cannon Park 1.
That's being done.
That's being done. And then FY '25 is currently scheduled for Cannon Park 2. And then for,
Where is Cannon Park 2? Is it right there next to Cannon 1? Geographically?
I believe,
Behind it, it's a small field.
Oh, okay. Now I know where you're at. Okay. All right.
then based off of the discussion during the FY '24 strategic planning retreat, there was a conversation to look at Wicker Park in FY 2028 to see about the wear and tear on that, to see whether or not there would be a need potentially to replace that field at that time. So that's why it's a zero, that's why the cost is unknown, but it's a potential build based off of that conversation.
Now, thank you. The update to the PDO, we don't have any dollars in there. Would those be a consulting fees if we were to put money in there?
It's currently slated for FY 2023.
We have
Okay.
a budget.
Yeah, it's ultimately, thank you for bringing up the point. Ultimately, there will be dollars there, but they're being rolled forward from '23.
It will be. Okay. I wondered how. Right. So this summer, okay, this summer will, okay. So that was really the sum of all I wanted to do. I see the West Pinehurst Park is down for 2028, and I'm sort of comfortable with that right now. It doesn't, I don't want to move it any closer, but I think that's realistic as a possibility, and we can always address it later down the road. But my big things are the downtown parking versus the public services complex. So I would encourage us, I don't know if we have to do it tonight, or we wait to the,
Let's
when
see
we
how we
meet
all
to-
feel about this. Jeff and Matt, but particularly to you, Jeff, what's the risk or the issue, if any, to make the move, to move parking out a few years and public services back a few years? What issues are in your mind about that at this time?
I don't know that there's any particular risk in moving the public service to move forward. The only potential risk with regard to moving the downtown parking facilities out is that, like I said, this is something that we have expressed a relatively strong interest in getting done, but we're not in control of our own destiny. And if the stars aligned and other parties agreed to something like this, and we wouldn't be able to execute it because we don't have this kind of money built into the plan. That's
Well, wouldn't the money still be in the plan, but just a few years out?
right, but moving it forward, I mean, moving it out is easy. Moving it out from there is easy. Moving it forward, a $3 million bill forward in, the year before execution or 2 years is a much bigger
Flip.
effort. Now, I think that, I seem to recall that we had a similar discussion about this potential trade-off, either in the retreat or in the aftermath of the retreat. And we suggested that we as staff will endeavor to try to find a way to move the public services move forward in this plan if we can make the numbers balance. That's
Well, when you
that's
say
another
number-
approach, I guess.
How many numbers are we talking about? I mean, you're talking about the whole of the,
We're talking about, Lydia brought up the 5-year projection, right? So
Right. Okay.
you've all seen that at least once now in our efforts to make sure that you're hitting those parameters where we want to with regard to fund balance and our operating margin.
right. Wouldn't it
Given an
be,
acceptable tax rate and,
so, wait a minute, Pat.
Go ahead.
In the, let's see, as soon as late April, maybe sooner, you're going to be coming to us with an outline of the budget that you see coming together. And from there, based on council input at that meeting, you'll go and you will fix your recommendation for us to consider, correct?
that's right.
So is it the case that this idea to move parking out some years and public services to more recent years, that is now in your thinking? If council agrees we want to do that, we'll take a consensus here in a minute.
Yeah.
And then you will try to come back and whether that can work or not. Is that?
Yeah,
that-
I mean, so one thing, I guess I would suggest one of two approaches. One is what I just suggested, where, note to staff, we'll try to move the relocation of the public services complex forward as we develop this plan. Alternately, you could just give us the directive right now, let's try to move the public services project forward 2 years, and let's move the expand downtown parking facilities out 2 years, for example, and that becomes the baseline that we're working off of. Now, we still may run the numbers and find out that there's an opportunity to do something a little different on a faster timeline because of how things balance out year to year, but
Right. And in the following year,
Yeah.
we could just change our mind altogether because something was put in our lap.
Well, yeah, but Pat, we don't want to be,
yeah.
this is long-term, planned stuff, and we have to measure all this against our fund balance and
I
a lot
understand
of
that.
other issues. So we don't want to be, we have 5-year plans and.
I'm
going
not
out.
suggesting, though, in any way that any alterations we make changes the top line of the numbers here. So I'm working within these numbers. So that's
Right. Well, I
zero-sum
think
game.
to John's point, and the one I made earlier, if we decided, if we moved, for example, the parking facility out, and we decided 2 years from now to move it back in, that likely would change the top line numbers.
Okay. Right, that's the risk.
I can't see moving parking out. I like your suggestion of moving relocation of public services in. We've been talking about how valuable that land is and how, what a benefit it would be to to Pinehurst, to Village Place. And just because you guys work with the numbers to see if that would work, doesn't mean we're going to do it, but it'd be helpful to look at the numbers to see if we move that, because it has been a hot topic.
Yeah.
And the 400,000, that was just for the design, right?
Yes.
Now, I will tell you that, I mean, for example, this is guidance, right? We might ultimately find out that $3 million bill doesn't fit in 27, and we have to come back with a different recommendation than that.
Yeah, it's a big number,
Yeah,
could change even where it is.
yeah.
Well, what pressures would there be if we did move up public services to an earlier date? I mean, it sounds nice and it may be a good idea, but that also creates some pressures of things we have to do. Could we even meet that timeline? I don't know.
I don't think we would be creating any undue pressures or risk moving that forward by 2 years.
Into what would be,
Mike,
well, where would you be placing it then, Jeff? 2025?
From what I'm hearing is the
2026.
design in 2025 and then the build in 26?
Well, I think I was suggesting design in 26, build in 27.
Oh, build in
That's 2 years,
27,
right?
okay.
But you put it in, you run the numbers to see if it'll work.
You can try that.
But Patrick, you said something about the things that have happened over the past few months or years, something. It
Here's
seems like,
maybe this is another approach.
What?
Tell us to move, tell us to move that for forward 2 years, And if we can't make it work, then the thing that slips first is the parking facilities.
Say that again, Jeff. Move the public services complex forward 2 years
Yeah,
to 25 or 6, 26?
design in '26.
Design in 26,
But
and
I-
then,
Yeah, and I know that won't work because we can't put those two big bills in '27, so.
Yeah.
right, right. So, and then we would move parking to the right a year or so,
Potentially.
potentially.
um,
Well, I
Yeah,
Take
we would
a
have to
look
be
at it.
careful on that one because we don't want to disrupt the open in '29.
right. No,
Yeah.
no, I understand that.
Why it's sitting in '27 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm fine taking again, I just think it's something we ought to take a look at. I was more encouraged when we had the news about that truck thing. It got me more energized about the possibility of us finding some sort of solution to this puzzle of how we move out of there.
Oh, the land?
Yeah,
Land.
and because, we've been talking about it for almost a year.
Right.
And you've had conversations with the county, with
Yeah.
other folks, and I know that these things move slow. It's the nature
Right.
of government.
Yeah, I
That was amazing.
remind you that the land swap option is in direct competition with putting the public services yard up there, so, yeah. What do we want most?
Right. Well,
I think on the table is a sort of a hybrid idea that Jeff Sanborn just mentioned. We want to be specific about that as to the years, and then council can decide whether that's what we want to do, Jeff. So it would be, you want to just restate that on the parking facility would go out, or we would leave it, actually, and then just move the public services, right?
Yeah, what I'm understanding is that you're making public services, moving it to the left 2 blocks, all right, to FY 2026 for design. And that we're not necessarily moving downtown parking.
Right.
If it becomes a problem, they can end up slipping that, but trying not to make sure it interferes with the open.
Let me backtrack on my recommendation just a little bit there. As I look at the numbers again, going, focusing on those two big bills in the same year. If we move public services 2 years to the left, I think necessarily we cannot get the downtown parking done until after the 29 open.
You're basing that on the overall cost or just in the timing?
Yeah, it's the timing and having,
the construction.
you'd have construction of the public services complex in the same year as construction of the downtown parking facility.
Right.
And I think that's going to blow the top off that year's budget. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
unless we had a bunch of capital that we could dump.
I'm sure Dana will find the capital somewhere.
That's your first assignment, Dana. So that might be safer from a budget plug standpoint to even move the downtown parking 1 year to the right, just to give us that wiggle room, and we can always adjust it more, but that way we don't have it, as you described it, the two of them like this. Because those would be, because that 400,
I guess alternately, you might entertain, move the public services complex 1 year earlier, and then those two big bills aren't in the same year.
Okay. Is that more or less understood and agreeable to the council?
I'm fine.
Jeff will
Can
take that into,
can you run them both, Jeff, just to see if it,
It
See what looks-
kind of
what
goes back
comes
to my earlier recommendation, or the recommendation I made several weeks ago, which was, we'll try to move it to the left
right,
and come back to you.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm fine. I think we had a good discussion.
Okay.
yeah, this keeps us focused on all the capital projects and all the IAPs. It's a good little update here.
Yeah.
All right, so council's agreeable to what we're going to hear, and Jeff will come back, obviously, in the pre-budget or preliminary budget. And, well, we would know probably at that time whether this is going to work or not.
So effectively, what we're approving on here or agreeing to is that they look at this to move public services to the left.
1
and then
year.
come back to us and say what they found.
What can be done, yeah.
Say again, Jeff Morgan?
What I'm understanding that we are approving to is that moving Public Services Complex to the left 1 year, and they're going to run the numbers and come back to us as what they can do.
Correct.
I got no problem with that.
Okay. Jeff Sanborn, you okay with that? Kelly, you got the information? Council's agreeable? Let's move on.
Thank you all.
I see a lot of smiles on some of the department heads back there looking at this discussion, and let's move on to a brand-new subject. Jeff,
Okay.
go
the
ahead.
Municipal Planning Organization. For the public's benefit, as a result of the most recent census, Southern Moore County, or a piece of Southern Moore County that's made up largely of Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen, Taylortown, Whispering Pines, and Pine Bluff, as well as some unincorporated areas in our area, have met the threshold to be called an urbanized zone. And that's a population of 50,000 within a certain geographic footprint. And because we meet that threshold, we now have, I guess I'm trying to figure out whether it's an obligation or an opportunity to stand up a municipal planning organization. The function of a municipal planning organization is to do the transportation-related planning for that larger municipal or larger urbanized zone. And given the fact that it's a multi-jurisdictional problem, the idea is to stand up this organization that represents the interests of all of the local governments to have jurisdiction within that geographical area. And it's governed by a board that has, that's appointed in accordance with the original charter of the organization. I'm calling it a charter. That may not be the right word, but so yeah, we will have to work with our neighboring communities to first of all define what the geographic area is. Then, based on what that geographic area is, to work with all of the local governments that are represented in that geographic area to create a charter. And in that charter, the charter would include details about how each local jurisdiction is represented on the governing board, as well as dues structures and voting procedures and all of that stuff. And I'm sure there's probably a lot more detail that will have to be built into that as well. We have been told that, again, I don't know if this is an obligation or a best practice. It's not real clear to us right now, but the general timeline that a municipal planning organization should be stood up in is within 1 year of having broken that 50,000 barrier. Well, census is over. We got those results a while ago, so that clock's already ticking, if you will. So we really kind of have to move fast with our neighboring communities. Another deadline that we were made aware of is that, again, I'm not sure if the right word is deadline, but there's an expectation that a municipal planning organization will have a metropolitan planning organization, not a municipal planning organization. A metropolitan planning organization will have a metropolitan transportation plan in place within 4 years of having broken that threshold, right? And so, and Jane distributed some information about those plans earlier. You know that right now we function under the county's comprehensive transportation plan, and the general planning horizon for comprehensive transportation plans is about 10 years. So they need to be updated about once every 10 years. Metropolitan planning organization also has to have a comprehensive transportation plan that kind of has all the broad priorities, if you will. But then every 5 years, it has to update a metropolitan transportation plan, which has more detailed more details built into it. So kind of on the way forward side of this, we have this teed up for an agenda item at the next Tri-Cities meeting. We thought that was a good launching point, given the fact that we already have this close working relationship with Southern Pines and Aberdeen, and we make up the lion's share of that 50,000 number. But we're also reaching out to folks in Taylortown, Pine Bluff,
Whispering Pines.
maybe Foxfire, Whispering Pines, and I think we're going to have this first meeting before adding Foxfire to the,
Isn't there a county manager meeting too?
we're going to talk about it there as well, just
Okay.
kind of socialize it with them going into this, to let them know what's happening and what our thought process is. So there's not a lot of detail to hang on the bone at this point, but we just wanted to let you know and let the public know what this thing is and what its function is, and that we're going to be working pretty hard with our neighboring communities to try to stand this up and get it going in the future. There's been some discussion about funding. What we know from looking at examples, and I think that the example that Matt Day from Triangle JCOG shared with us was New Bern, which was a most recently stood up metropolitan planning organization. Their example suggested that I think their annual budget was on the order of about $300,000. And of that, about $50,000 came from dues paid by member local governments. Again, I mentioned before that the charter would have to define what that due structure looked like. And like, for example, I think a really logical approach might be based on population or something like that. But the good news is the lion's share of the funding, the rest of that funding comes from state or federal pots of money. I'm not real clear on the exact source yet, but it's not from the local governments. Jane?
Jeff, is there any, there doesn't seem to be much doubt in your mind that this is mandated to be done. There's no sort of option here whether it's done or not, and because there's federal influence and responsibility here as well as state. Is that fair to say?
I'm not comfortable saying it's a mandate yet. I think it's clearly in our best interest.
What would make it a mandate?
Sorry?
What would make it a mandate? I mean, it's not,
Federal law.
Yeah.
but if you have a population of 50,000, then you necessarily have to either join one or start your own,
Want to start one, yeah,
and we make the 50,000 threshold.
we do.
So that to me seems like a mandate.
Oh, I don't know if I don't know if it says you must, I guess is,
Oh. Oh, well, that's important.
At the TARPO meeting, Jeff, they used the phrase, a requirement.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't press for the legal interpretation. but-
TARPO is a regional organization. We would be withdrawing from that
Yeah.
and forming our own metropolitan planning organization. But Jane, you had some questions, I think, about
I do.
the inclusion of other towns and cities, where that comes from and how we would do that, or
Right, we've been limping along with TARPO, Triangle Area Rural Planning Organization. I think it's rural, isn't it, not, or regional?
That's right. RPOs are rural.
And if you look on the last page of this handout we have, is the list of 9 towns. And if there's going to be unincorporated areas, then presumably Moore County as a governmental unit would be involved. It's one thing to say somebody like New Bern as one town.
No, I don't. It's just the urbanized zone name is New Bern.
Okay.
They have several
Okay,
other local
Charlotte, how
jurisdictions
about
as well.
Charlotte? Charlotte's got one. Charlotte's got an MPO. Raleigh-Durham has one. But to have 9, and with the county 10, little governmental units. Now, Pinehurst, Southern Pines, and Aberdeen have, over the years, worked together on our Tri-Cities, which is a derivative of Tarpo, right?
No, it's not a derivative of
No,
Tarpo.
it was
just
separately established for other
Established.
reasons.
supported by Triangle J COG.
Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. And, but, you know, we've worked together. We haven't with these other towns. So now we're being lumped in, and when you think about it, I mean, you know, one does drive to Carthage from time to time. You know, I shop at the Taylortown shops and stuff, but we don't, I don't know that we plan with them on the same level that we do with our, you know, two sister cities. So who is it who drew this line around these towns? Because if you go back to our planning documentation that we got in December, it shows that for the Tri-Cities, Pinehurst, Southern Pines, and Aberdeen, the 2020 population, census population, is only 41,000 and change for those three altogether. And they did a growth projection that's in our little charts that was in our notebooks. And it doesn't show us for the Tri-Cities getting to 50,000 until 2035. So who drew this line?
The federal government drew the line, and that line does not encompass all of these jurisdictions. These are just numbers for you to look at population-wise. There's an opportunity for all of these jurisdictions to be included, but not all of them are actually in the urbanized zone that's been defined. The jurisdictions on this list that are within the urbanized zone that's been defined are Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen, Whispering Pines, Pine Bluff, and Taylortown, plus Moore County. Not a single one of those jurisdictions, I think even including Pinehurst, is entirely within this urbanized zone. Now, the requirements for defining the geographical area associated with a metropolitan planning organization very generally are, first, it has to include all of the urbanized zone that was defined by the federal government. So there's piece parts of all of these local governments that are in that urbanized zone. Now, it's almost all of Pinehurst, almost all of Southern Pines, almost all of Aberdeen, almost all of Foxfire. But maybe less of Pine Bluff and Whispering Pines, and a very small amount of Moore County. Now, the other component of the geographical area that the general statutes call attention to is that it should also, or actually says must, I think, also include an area outside the urbanized zone that there's a realistic expectation, and who gets to define what that realistic expectation is, I don't know, but those areas that there's a realistic expectation might also become urbanized within a 20-year planning horizon. So as I called attention to before, one of the first things that Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen, Whispering Pines, Pine Bluff, Taylortown, and Moore County have to decide is what is that geographic region, and as a result, what other local governments are going to be involved in this.
Jeff, that's up to us to figure that out?
It's up to the collective body. We're going to have to negotiate this with all of our neighbor local governments.
Well, and as you say that, and as I'm listening to you, I think there seem to be a lot of administrative hurdles, administrative components just to get this going.
Yes.
Yeah, probably there were a lot of good intentions that started this.
This is kind of this is a big blind spot for us. This would have been an IEP probably in our plan.
Yeah.
Even though this is not, it's not even remotely within our control because we have to work with our neighboring governments.
So right there, we need to take off the table anything that's in our minds about, we have an option to do this or not. We have to do this.
I think
And now
our,
we need
I
it- now-
think our, well,
I don't
And I
know.
was
I
gonna
think
say-
our partners around us are going to insist on doing it. If some of
Okay.
you think it's not a good idea, it's so,
You know,
I
I
don't
would
know
be,
enough about it to know whether it's a good idea or not. You said before, you thought it was in our best interest. In what way? Does it improve our autonomy?
it will
We have
integrate.
Better control?
It will integrate the transportation planning needs of our urbanized zone, and it will give us our own pot of prioritization points that are used every time STIP projects are scored, rather than having to rely on the distribution of TARPO points.
And it's multimodal, right?
There's a real advantage
Yes,
right
it's
there.
multimodal. Does it, the term urbanized zone makes me nervous.
Recognize that over the past several years.
R-V-I-C-E. So, is it an effort to turn us from a village to,
It's an effort to recognize the reality that we are an urbanized zone and therefore give us the resources to meet our transportation planning needs.
it really strikes me as a poster child of just government drowning in itself. I mean, regardless of what the law, whatever the law requires us to do, we have to do that. I believe there is some wiggle room through all this, because I don't know how these other communities are going to feel as they start to look at this and say, well, wait a minute, what tail is wagging what dog in this process? And it really is I just think it's a horrible example of just government run amok. One more layer. We're going to lay one more thing on top of everything else we do.
read this, you're
Now,
faint.
I will say this, on page 18 and 19, I circled the word fiscal constraint 4 times. So whoever is the author of this document knew to put some buzzwords in there. But they want fiscal constraint applies to each program year. The requirement for fiscal constraint is met. The TIPS demonstrate fiscal constraint. That's all wonderful, but we've got TARPO, we've got ARPO, we got Tri-Cities, we got J government. You know, we got our hands full with the Village of Pinehurst, and almost all the governments are part-time officials.
And if we did, and once this is stood up, we won't have TARPO.
Yeah, that'll be gone.
Right,
This is
that goes
replacing-
away, and
The one for one, it's not adding a layer.
So you've mentioned some of the, well, first of all, we have to do it. Second of all, there are some benefits. Obviously, transportation planning is a key element of what the council is interested in coordinating with our surrounding communities, so we have to, and still want to do that. And I think maybe the way forward, you've already sort of charted it for us, Jeff. The town managers are going to have continuing discussion on this, and you're going to be investigating the New Bern document or the New Bern
Or other
effort in this?
examples.
Okay, all right. And there's going to be contact with the other towns beyond the Tri-Cities about their effort to be a part of this.
Right. Now, the other thing I think I forgot to mention is, this urbanized zone is known as the Pinehurst Southern Pines Urbanized Zone. And that's not just about a title. The charter has to be adopted by the voting representation of at least 75% of the population. or
I'm
the
reading,
local
I got your
governments
memo right in front of me,
representing
I just
75%
had a
of the
question.
populations.
Yeah.
It also has to be adopted both by Southern Pines and Pinehurst,
As well as NCDOT.
as well as NCDOT.
Oh,
And how about this, governance, okay? Page 6, typically an MPO governance structure includes a variety of committees as well as a professional staff. Oh. Page 7, you've got a policy committee, which includes elected officials from local government jurisdictions, and then representatives of different transportation modes, I don't know what that means, state agency officials, and non-voting members, such as,
Right, we're not,
Okay,
we are
then-
not Raleigh and we're not Durham, and so our organization will be necessarily much more simple than what you're
because this
reading
is-
there. And it would be up to our local governments to define what is needed.
and then you've also got another thing that establishes, I don't know.
I
Who
think we'll
wrote
be
this
talking
document?
more about this, Jane, as this evolves. We're going to have, here, Jeff will be meeting with his counterparts. Then we're going to have the Tri-Cities meeting. We'll see what evolves from this. I think there's, I do think it's just sort of
I think it's
the
what-
leviathan of government, just putting something more in place. And we'll just have to meet our requirements, but see how we can assert ourselves with the interests of Pinehurst
Right.
coming first.
It sounds to me, though, as this goes forward, Southern Pines and Pinehurst are going to have to take a lead, and based on the comments you just made. So our influence in that direction of policy will be much more clear and direct than I think we have now through TARPO.
We have to agree to it.
But it also would allow us to have more input to that and to have things a way that we would like, if we
Right,
can.
that's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it has to be something we're happy with.
Right. Now, who actually prepared all this? Where, did this come from Kelly, you got all this? And what's the source of this? Is it off of federal? Okay,
Thank you,
Thank-
Kelly.
yeah.
Yeah, if I look at this and I just think staffing requirements seem huge.
Sorry?
Staffing requirements for this seem huge.
Seem huge?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's go to the Newbern example, right? Their annual budget's like $300,000. That's for all their contracted planning and their staff. So, you know, I think a small RPO probably has a minimal staff of, or not RPO, MPO, a minimal staff of, 2 to 5 people.
But that's hiring, you mean for the organization total? So the village would pay for some of that, Southern Pines would pay, all of the municipalities that are part of it
Yeah.
would all contribute to the staffing requirements.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think it was the Newbern example, roughly $300,000 annual budget. Of that, only 50,000 comes from all of the combined total of all the member governments.
Okay.
So if we're roughly the same size, right, you could envision a $50,000 bill spread across all of these local governments.
And the rest
And
comes
our share based on population might be 15,000. I don't know, like, well,
Whatever.
50,000 people, $50,000, more like 17,000.
Yeah, yeah. But point is, not a huge number.
It's not a huge number.
Yeah, that's- okay.
No, but it's going to be another layer of stuff for everybody to do.
No, once you stand it up, it does the same thing Tarpo's doing now.
Yeah.
That's the administrative hurdles getting it standing up.
That's right.
Are you sure about the TARPO replacement? They talked about replacing RPO with MPO. They did not mention replacing TARPO in my call.
Tarpo is an RPO,
Yeah.
Area,
Oh.
Rural
RPO.
Planning Organization. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
it's one and the same. All right,
Right. So it's, again,
I got it.
the MPO, the Pinehurst Southern Pines MPO would replace TARPO,
Right.
but require, and I think we hear among all of us, a concern about the staffing and the time constraints to set all this up and manage it into the future. Expenses will be an issue, but not too much.
Standpoint of effort and staff time and elected body time.
Yes.
This is a big startup cost. Once you get it up and running, it's running itself.
Right, right. So we'll count on you to bring back to us how big a task it's going to be once you've had the chance to sort that out. Would you anticipate, Jeff, maybe at least once a month or maybe at each meeting for the next couple months to sort this out, depending on who you're able to see? And
I think it will be on, it'll be dependent on when developments happen.
right. And isn't there a time frame we have to have established it, though? Is it 2 years and then 4 years for a transportation plan?
Here was the thing that's been.
Just one?
We've
Okay,
been told.
so it's out there. Yeah. Pat?
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting is, if we decide we're going to have updates every month, I might not bring you anything for 2 months, and then
Sure.
everything all happens at once. We don't know enough to know
Yeah.
how we should structure this right now.
We don't know. Okay. I'm sure you'll provide good direction on that. Pat, did you have a comment?
No, I mean, I think we'll just know more after he has 2 more, these meetings take place with Tri-Cities and county managers. That may bring some focus as to where this whole thing is, but, I just, doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth, but we do what we have to do.
I think there's a lot of unknowns, and that's the concern. And the other part of this, though, is it is replacing a different organization that we have. Now, to what degree, how good is it going to be, and that kind of stuff, there's always apprehension, and there's apprehension with change. I do like the idea that there's a mandated transportation improvement program. I kind of made a comment to Patrick before, it'll be one of the urbanized areas that's got a transportation improvement program that includes golf carts. Probably not too many places in urban America have that. But I certainly support driving down this road and doing the formation of it and identifying it and get a better perception as to what's happening, because I think there's going to be a lot of good coming out of it. So let's push forward with it, see what happens. As to quote Patrick on there, the focus will come in.
Yeah. I think that's a good discussion. We can end this now and go on to another point. All right.
Okay, here?
Jeff, do you want to proceed? And then we'll get into the other issues.
Yep.
You want to take your next point with the library? And,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, and then we'll get into
Says
Dornick
section
and the
business.
county water. Yeah.
As you know, we're developing our relationship with our new contracted partners to do the design of the next library and archives. And also, as you know, previously, we've been kind of marching down this road that we would do all that expansion on the Village Green. And we just got this updated report from the Park Service, which kind of, again, highlights the importance of maintaining the integrity of the Village Green. And, it's also, it is true that the language that's in that report maintains some flexibility for us. It tells us that we have to maintain, or you have to exercise the utmost care, I guess, in balancing the needs of expansion with maintaining that integrity. And I think a major concern that the Park Service has with regard to maintaining the integrity of that green is maintaining the green. And the thing that works against maintaining the green is expanding that building. So I think what they're telling us is they're suggesting that we minimize the expansion of that building. I distributed a suggestion to you all a week or two ago that we might want to consider another option, and that is to build a new library, not library and archives, but just library on the 1 acre lot that we have on Rattlesnake Trail. And I observed that it would be consistent with the small area plan, and Alex and Darren at the time also agreed that was true. So that might be an option. So we could build a new library on Rattlesnake Trail, and then we could just expand the archives in the current building, not expand on it at all, other than maybe doing some ADA and accessibility improvements and the like, and doing some interior renovations on that structure. And then move the Welcome Center in there, and it would give us the ability to expand and partner with other organizations. John, this might dovetail with your later conversation, but partner with other organizations to bring other exhibits into our archives to make it a more hands-on museum type of experience than just a go dig and research type of experience. So there's that option. I think it's very viable based on the space available. We could build that library structure on Rattlesnake Trail. In conversations that I've had with Jeff and Darren and Alex, after I made that observation to you, we now recognize that there are some other locations in the immediate vicinity where we could do the same thing, and it would also be consistent with a small area plan. The first is right straight across the street from us here at Village Hall. And that was an early option that we examined for putting the library. The advantage there is that we have a lot of acreage there, right? More than enough room for parking. We could set the building back away from the road a little bit, make it more consistent with this campus and this footprint. And it would all tie in from the standpoint of how we work together as a village staff. It's kind of nice to have, that department right across the street versus all of them downtown. Now, you still have that split department because you'd have the archives downtown, but it would help in that regard. So that's one candidate. And then you might also remember from the small area plans that it depicted a commercial building, if you will, on the other side of the police department and that little annex that we have for Parks and Recreation there. So between there and the intersection with Rattlesnake Trail, on that same side of the road, there's another option there. So the bottom line is we have three really good options for doing that same thing that would protect the integrity of the village green and might be the best outcome from the standpoint of protecting our National Historic Landmark. So I just wanted to have this conversation with you now because if we don't want to get too far down the road with our consultants, it'd be nice to make that decision sooner rather than later.
I think this is very, very interesting, and it sounds very practical. I like the idea of having a library that's close to the community center and close to the parks. I think that's great, and I think all three of those spots, kind of hit that a little bit. And I like the idea of not having to interfere too much with the village green. I think that building a new building is a lot more straightforward than trying to do pickup sticks with an old building. And being able to use the existing library building for an enhanced archives and exhibit center and so forth is great. As long as we're able to go that direction under our contract with the library.
Yeah.
I ditto everything that Jane just said.
I'm sorry, Jeff, say again?
I support everything that Jane
Jane
just said. Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to jump in because Jane, you brought up our contract with our partners, the
Yep.
foundation, and doing something like this helps us with them as well. And here's how. When we negotiated our contract with them, we put in that contract a provision that would require them to remove the bookstore from the post office so that we could use that building as swing space as we did this dance inside the current facility of expansion, renovation, and still keep the library and archives to some degree up and running. We'd move a portion out into the, it's a lot of
Right.
probably this over time, going back and forth from one facility to the other. They have indicated a strong desire to us to be able to keep running that bookstore there, and they think they've got a path forward where they can make it profitable. So
Yes.
in the interest of benefiting that long-term relationship, it's probably a good move too.
Jeff, the 3 parcels, the topography, Rattlesnake is flat. What about the other 2? And will topography impact the decision?
Question. I think that I'd have to take a closer look at the one down the street, but I think it's more flat than across the street. Is that fair?
Across the
Yeah.
street was going to be a,
There's a little bit there, and, and it would be down below the surface of the road because it drops down there. But it's manageable, and it's manageable because we have the space. We can make something work over there.
Jeff, picking up on Lydia's thought, though, you think well, we don't know yet, but do you think it would work in both of the locations across the street, near the police department on the one hand and across over here? Or were you just addressing the parcel directly across from Village Hall? I wasn't sure which ones you were addressing there.
Well, I was calling attention to 3 options. One is on
Yes.
the Rattlesnake Trail, one is
Right, I know
straight
that,
across from here,
Yeah,
plus or minus left or right,
Yeah.
closer to the police station or closer to the greens, somewhere in that
all right,
vicinity.
somewhere, all right.
Now, the other option I was calling attention to is on the far side of the police
Police
station
station.
and in our Parks and Recreation Annex
Yeah,
building.
so I think not everybody here may remember that they're
Kind of across the
buried
street
back
from
in the
it.
trees there is a storage facility that
Across-
Parks and Recreation uses for a lot of their equipment.
Yeah, across the street from the entrance to the church down there.
Yeah,
We own that ground as well.
okay, so that's flatter. My concern about those spaces across Magnolia Road here has always been the topography. How would we manage water? How would we manage parking, egress and access coming up hills and that sort of thing? But I think, having not thought about it or looked at the property, further down, further north, I'll call that, past the police department, is the topography would work better there. On the other hand, just preliminarily on what you're talking about land-wise, I think that Rattlesnake is probably a better overall location, but really haven't thought through these other parcels across the street.
how does staff give us, we all like the idea. I think we all like the idea. How do you give us what we need to decide which of those parcels is the best parcel?
Well, I mean,
And the pluses and minuses of each?
Yep, and Lydia, when you say that, you're talking about these new parcel ideas compared to our current plan?
I think we like the idea of let downtown be the archives and build a new library over here, but the parcels are different.
Yes.
I wouldn't mind coming and just walking them just to see what they look like.
Yeah,
But
sure.
how do we determine what's important and which of these pieces of property have the best features for a new library?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, right now what we're doing is we're identifying whether we like the idea of building a new library in one of those 3 parcels. To get the information as to which one of the parcels, there's going to have to be more analysis on there. Because yes, there's a topography issue, yes, there's going to be an engineering issue, and water flows downhill, and that's downhill over there, okay? So that all has to be evaluated. I don't think we're going to decide on which parcel it is at this point in time. I think
Right.
What we're saying right now is, let's move forward with this idea.
with analyzing those 3 options.
Correct.
Yeah, I'd like to address the issue because as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a premature decision for us to make. We have a contract that we all spent a lot of time on.
Yes, we did.
We interviewed one architect after another. We grilled them particularly about their respect for the location, the green, the history of the village. And we ended up deciding on a particular firm. They sent us a proposal. We edited it around this table and put further requirements on it. We sent it back to them. It came back in the form of an agreement, and we entered into an agreement with them. What the National Park Service said was that they didn't want any new buildings on that village green. But you could expand buildings. they said there were, in the answer to the question of what goes into that, they said there were 4 factors. They said there was scale, materials, massing, and style. Architects understand that more than I do, but I think I get the message. And then and Ellen Rankin herself said, when I asked her what all that means, she says, well, basically, work with us early on this so we can help you get what you want there. I'd like to see the work product from this firm that we put a lot of time into and show us what the vision they have before we start heading off on 3 other sites. They all may be great sites. I'm not rejecting that. But I'm just saying, we gave them a charge. They owe us a work product. And I'd like to see how they're going to produce what they heard from us, the village council, that we'd like to see there before we change course. And I don't think that's an unrealistic request to make of a vendor, particularly after we've gone through the decision process.
Patrick, I don't disagree with you. I think one of the biggest considerations for me downtown is parking, which they surely will address when they give us the work product. But, it's a problem now. It could become a bigger problem, and that problem is hopefully alleviated. I'm not saying we should move, but I think these have become viable options that at some point we've got to consider.
I think also they're expanding on the Village Green. I mean, they have to expand.
We did, no, they don't. We didn't give them that charge to expand onto the Village Green.
Okay.
We gave them the
Maybe
exact
it's an
opposite.
assumption on there that they're looking at the expansion. My understanding as we went forward is that there's going to be changes into the Village Green with the proposal we have there. Now, are we
I didn't see that.
losing, and maybe it's just my misinterpretation. I would have to go back and look at that. Are we hurting ourselves by making this change with the
Consultant?
previous work we've done?
Wording, what does that
We're
mean?
much better off making the change now. So I go back to this comment about premature. No, I don't think it's premature at all. I think it's not premature unless you are willing to pay for the design work twice.
Well,
I think we've
did.
got probably some input here from Doug and Jeff Batten. They've come to the table drawn by our discussion here. Are there some thoughts you want to pass on to us there?
Yeah, so we actually met with the architects yesterday, and we kind of told them the new thought process that there might be another location that we're considering. We're under contract with them to work on the programming, so we're moving forward with, you need this much space, you want to do these things in your building, and they're gonna come up with all of that and help us decide how big of the building we need to be and where we want things placed.
well,
But as part of this conversation, they were very much open to helping us decide what would be the best location. Is it better to, expand on site? What would that potentially look like? They could do some layouts for us, or they could help us look at some of these other sites and say, there's advantages and these are what they are, and these might be the few things you want to look at because
So
they
our
might make it more difficult.
our contract with them is for $140,000, is that right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's specifically for programming, but we can work with them, and they're very reasonable, and they were kind of excited about the opportunities to look at some other locations as well.
Well,
To that point, and to Lydia's earlier point and question about how do we decide, I recall that when they did design work for the community center, they actually did some graphical layout work for us, comparing what it would look like across the street to Cannon Park to over here in Wicker Park. And they might be willing to do something like that. In this case as well, I would expect they would ask us to pay for it.
Yeah, there would be some survey work that we'd probably need to pay for and third-party stuff, but yeah.
I think, to Doug's point, right now, we made them aware that, these options could exist, but that decision doesn't have to happen today because it's the programming aspect that they are currently going to be focusing on. how much square footage do we really need? They're kind of going to affirm or reevaluate the needs assessment that was completed. They're sort of going to do their own, I guess, due diligence on that document. And talking with stakeholders, and we identified a number of stakeholder groups that included council, of course. And they will then, when talking with staff about, what kind of programs and activities and what kind of spaces do we need in the library, they'll build out, you're going to need X number of square feet.
Let me go back to the needs assessment issue. That took place before a couple of us got here. But that needs assessment was pre-COVID.
That's right.
Totally pre-COVID. And the library world has changed. Lydia pointed out in an email regarding, to all of us, visits to the library pre-COVID, where they are now, and how much, if any, they've bounced back, which is very little. I remember your email. So I think that, I like the idea that they're going to sort of reevaluate that, because I don't know if what we, the folks who did the needs assessment, thought in 2019 really still holds today in this world about libraries.
We specifically talked about the impact of COVID and how much that has changed behaviors, but how much are those changes going to be permanent? How many are going to eventually revert back to the way people behave pre-COVID? That's a bit of throw a dart on the board. But we did have that conversation specifically, talking around the needs assessment and the idea of sort of reevaluating it in today's world, but more so from the standpoint of, the stakeholder conversations and those kinds of things that would need and should be held. So,
Well, Jeff Batten, did they give any indication that the world has changed for libraries? I'm personally not sure that it has, especially here in this library setting here in
yeah,
Pinehurst.
okay, yeah, I can tell you to our situation here, obviously, attendance had gone down through COVID, and it's beginning to rebound back up. I think what we're finding is the older citizens are more reluctant to come back into facilities, but the younger families are not. They are coming in. And so my own personal guess is on a generational basis, you will see probably people migrating back into libraries, but it's a generational thing. And so that may be 2 decades from now before you see everybody flocks to the library. People who are 40 years old now and are 65, 25 years now would not necessarily have the same concerns as a 65-year-old has today going into a
Now,
public
when you
space.
say programming, and I know we talked about this in the past, what they're trying to do is determine how much space for the different kind of offerings, programming that we'll do in a building. And in
Yeah.
that building we have today, but those space requirements would apply to any building, theoretically, correct? You're going to
Yeah,
need X
so
space for
you-
this and X space for that.
Right, so you've got children's area.
Yeah.
You may have teen and young adult area, and you have, regular adult population type areas. You need meeting room space potentially. You need, what are those kinds of needs? The children's area's got a place for playtime, but it's also got the books in there. And how much space does that require? I think those are the kinds of things primarily that we were talking about in terms of programming, but also how do you function? How does our library currently operate in terms of, what's the process for checkout and all of that kind of stuff and, placement, and where does that need to be and how big of a space does that occupy? How many, you gotta have 3 computers and whatever else, what do you have to have for that?
Doug, do you
At
re-
least those are the kinds of things I think I took away, and
So
Doug, you-
those numbers of space requirements would be true for any building we might be renovating or any building we might build new, correct? more or less correct?
Correct. If we're talking about an office building, yes, the same
Yeah,
concept.
all right. So, Pat, what I'm trying to get to is there,
But they would be different in a split building versus a
well, that's true.
consolidated
That's,
building.
that would be the difference, wouldn't it, Jeff? Yeah,
It-
okay.
It depends, and I'm going to throw some other things out here. We don't have to decide these tonight, of course, but if the museum side of the house is an area that we really wanted to grow and expand upon, given our reluctance to overly expand the footprint on our existing location, I think restricts our ability to apply square footage to that usage because that usage is going to be geared more towards non-residents. And if we're going to put dollars into a facility, we should put dollars into the library portion that our residents are going to use. And therefore, if you're going to be restricted on square footage, then, we're probably going to have to contract at least the thought process of whether the museum makes, or that exhibition space, the size of it, how does that need to?
Doug, do you recall, was it 60% of our residents do not use the library? Wasn't that the data?
I don't recall exactly
Yeah,
what
I think that was the
survey
data.
said.
Again, I think, I'm a big proponent of the village, next to the Village Green, that building. I was very excited about the architect we got, because I thought they heard our concerns about what we were looking for. And I think it's been there for some 60-something years. It is a gathering place. The library of the future, I think we're all carrying it with us. And we've got to, what did Wayne Gretzky say? I don't skate or play hockey, but he said, what? Skate to where the puck is going. Don't skate to where the puck is. We've got to think of the post-COVID library. And that's what concerns me about this. Will say this, the most attractive part of this suggestion is that the Given Library will be one place, and the Tufts Archives would be in its current location. And so, again, I just said it's a little premature for me because I'm looking forward to their work product. And maybe what they come with is really a good solution right there. But
So how far away from getting that work product, Doug, based upon yesterday's discussion?
What are you talking about, 12 weeks?
12 weeks.
Yeah. 12 weeks.
12 weeks from
Up
now?
to 12 weeks to understand the programming
Yeah.
component of
Well-
a library and archives.
well, during that time, can't we then look at the topography and look at the sites and do all that other stuff?
I think that would be part of the whole process as we work with them.
That's my understanding when you say the programming of it. They're going to work with us and look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
and
don't
they,
think
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
My understanding of this conversation was finding different options for the library, not discussing whether a library should be there or not. And I certainly support exploring these three different areas and seeing which one is the best. I have no, if they're going to come up with a work product or a summary of what they may advise us on for the Village Green, I'm more than happy to look at that and hear about it. Preserving the Village Green and preserving the historical aspect of the current library that we have, I think is very important. That is a huge plus. And that's
Agree with that.
going to other sites, and I see that as being a very viable thing. So I would support moving forward with the programming aspect, working with them. How can we move this into, what's the best solution for us?
Yeah,
And
And I
come
think
up with those
that's what
different
they were
proposals.
driving towards at the end of the day with our meeting was, we can help you come up with that recommendation of whether it should be in that same one spot or whether it should move. And if it should move, we talked to them specifically about these locations. I don't think we mentioned specifically the one where the Buildings and Grounds Operation Parks and Recreation is, but we did talk specifically about those two sites and the pluses and minuses even of the topography.
My understanding here that from what you're saying, that sounds very reasonable, and we're not stopping the
Right.
potential of something on the Village Green. Okay?
He
So we
talked,
just-
yeah, we did. That's exactly right. We just said, bear this in mind, in that once we know what the programming requirements and needs are,
Yeah.
then, we can at least pause at that point and say, okay, how big is that square footage? How big is that footprint on the Village Green? Do we think that's more than the National Park Service
Right.
would like?
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a smart idea to take a look at these other options, because the existing library is pretty, it's cute, people like it. Charming. But it's squished, it's small, and there's not much parking room. And if we have to keep the archives and the library all in that building and yet enhance them, we're going to be leaking out into the Village Green. We're going to have to figure out what we do about parking, and it's going to be tough to do. So the idea of being able to at least take a look at these other locations, I think is useful.
I have no problem taking a look at other locations.
Yeah.
I want to
And-
see their work product and recommendation for that.
Yeah.
And they know well that they were not to leak on to the Village Green. When we met with them, they sure didn't have that impression,
But we
that
would-
you can
we would
expand
then-
as, go ahead out there if you want to. That was not what I walked away with.
But if you can't
You can't,
expand
the building has to
very
be
much-
expanded to do this project.
Yeah,
Well,
Did we not agree to a certain?
Physics is still physics.
I understand that. Well, you can go down.
No.
Yes, you can. That's one possibility.
So-
It's not, if you look around that library, the configuration, there's a lot of
You're going to excavate under the
pockets
building?
of space.
Do you have any idea how heavy that building is with
have
its
to
slate
take the
roof?
building down in order to,
I don't know. That's why we pay the architects.
All right. I think we're moving off track here. We're getting a little bit too far into the weeds, which is we don't want to do that, but we also are dealing with a very complicated issue here. What I'm hearing is we're still going to get the work product in about 12 weeks, but we can explore with them and look to ourselves to these other locations where there are vacant lots at this time.
Yeah, and I can tell you, they and we did not want to prejudge or
Right.
prejudice an ultimate recommendation, but we did want them to be aware that,
Yes.
This National Park Service report
Yeah.
and the concern there and the opportunities that we potentially see of some other locations that would allow us maybe to do a little, in the same footprint, potentially a better exhibition facility, welcome center, and research archives
Yeah,
facility.
yeah, okay.
But we didn't, there was no final, this is the direction we should go. It was, let's get the programming done, let's see what the square footage needs are, and then we'll evaluate what is the best solution based on that. Is it to expand in
I
its
think that
current
meets the-
place or
Yeah.
separate the two?
I think that meets these needs. And Pat, I would add that we're at least going to have the archives remaining in the current building. And this firm, as you pointed out earlier on, was very good at that sort of restoration, internal restoration, not just external architecture. So whatever happens, their expertise is going to be used in the existing building, hypothetically here tonight, for just the archives. So we're going to take the benefit of our hiring of them to do this work in any case. All right. Jeff Sanborn, are we on track here? Are we all right?
We are.
Okay. Okay. Council, we understand? All right. I mean, I'm sort of on the fence on this, but I do like the idea that we have the ability to see what they've been working on, get these programming spaces right, and help determine where the best location is going to be. And it may be across the street. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good. All right. Moving on, we've got a couple other things to do. Let me give a quick, a little update on the evolution of a relationship with the town of Dornoch, Scotland, which came out from the John L. Ross celebration of his birth date on November 23rd last year. There's an interest on the part of the town, and we've expressed some interest to them on the part of the village of Pinehurst, to have some sort of relationship with the town and to build that relationship based on golf history on the one hand, and potentially some connections between a museum that they have. I don't know too much about it, but it is devoted to the world of golf in Dornoch and how it developed there over the years, And of course, back to the Tufts Archives and the museum nature of that here. Now, Jeff and I talked briefly about connections at sort of the, we'll call it the museum level, and we realized that if there were documents and artifacts and things that are in Dornick that they would lend to us for a period of time or vice versa, there's issues there about insurance and securing, how these documents and things would move. But museums do that all the time, and I think we could work that out even around our construction program that we've just been talking about tonight. So the idea which occurred to my mind in sort of labeling this is that we want to develop a relationship with them based upon the fact of Donald Ross's birthplace and early workplace to what became his workplace in America, which was Pinehurst, North Carolina. And with that connection of birthplace to workplace, I think we can build a sort of a rapport and a plan, a modest plan that annually we would connect with them, we would do some events with them, maybe we exchange golf materials, as I expressed, from the museums. So that's the sort of theme that, that we're working on, and it's just starting to develop now. But I wanted to, take any questions, comments that you all have about the general idea, if that idea of a relationship with them is helpful, is significant, something that Pinehurst should do, or any suggestions you have about how to build that, which we're just thinking through now. So that's my update for the day. What questions might you have?
Didn't we have a sister city arrangement, when Harris Blake went over to somewhere in the far east?
There are two things, yeah. The county, and because of I think it's ourselves as well, and I have to look back, the county has a relationship with a city in China
Is that it?
where during World War II, flyers from America landed their planes, crashed their planes in bombing raids on Japan, and that was what Harris
Okay,
developed.
so that's what
And I think too, in conjunction with Southern Pines, there's a town in Ireland, which I believe Southern Pines has a relationship with, but we supported that idea at the time. This is about 10 or 12 years ago, as I recall it, which wasn't very far past the time that Harris Blake was working on this idea of the China connection. Okay.
I like the idea, especially in connection with this, and we talked about the heritage tourism, and we've got Donald Ross and we've got Olmsted. And as we pursue the Donald Ross component of it, we might be able to work something out with the National Association of Olmsted Parks or something also to develop that component. And Ellen Rankin said that she would help us, she'd give us communities that are big on heritage tourism. Not that we need to leap into heritage tourism right now, because I don't know. There's a lot in here, and I don't know what our plan is going to be to get into this plan, but I really like the idea of furthering public awareness of Donald Ross and Frederick Law Olmsted, however we do it.
And on that point, I'm reminded of one thing. Mr. Ross not only was born in Dornick, but that's where his early career was as a club maker. In those days, the golf professionals, as they were known, were basically club makers, and this was all hickory shaft clubs and things of that type. So as far as I know, the museum, and maybe to some degree the club that is there, the Royal Dornoch Golf Club, has materials like that that might be of interest, again, to exchange over time and promote the world of golf. I think, too, that Dornick's pretty well known in the golf world, of course, and with the USGA coming here, we know they're bringing stuff from their museum, and there'll be things here from the Golf Hall of Fame that may tie into this relationship as well down the road. But initially, it would be something that we in Pinehurst would work on. And there'd probably a role for the resort here as well, I think. So those are some thoughts and ideas. Is that evolving
Yeah, I
sufficiently
think
that you know?
this is cool. It's a great idea.
Well, hopefully we'll get it to work just right. So we'll continue to work on that. Jeff and I have been talking a bit about it. Doug Willardson, of course, was very helpful in setting up the Donald Ross birthday Zoom call with Dornick in November. So I'll work with them and continue to keep you all informed and ask your opinions going forward. If you have any thoughts and ideas, please express. Okay? Next point, I think, Jane, you have a summary of what you learned at the County Water Task Force, which is something we need to really be of mind here. All those task forces, but the particular one here on water, I think.
Right, so the task forces are budget, economic, which I think is how to bring in more revenue, producing something. Land use plan / UDO, because their land use plan is still their 2013 one at this point. Law enforcement and veterans, legislative, which means working with the General Assembly, opioids, solid waste, and water and sewer. And I think the ones of particular interest to Pinehurst, because they're talking about Pinehurst when they're talking about these things. One is solid waste. Recycling what is now $145 a ton, and I guess they had some kind of a contract that they put together, and all of a sudden, the value of recyclables dropped right after they signed their contract, so it's not working out for them. There's a new Aberdeen collection site, which was bought a couple of years ago. But construction and demolition landfill is a real pinch point, and apparently there's only a 15-year lifespan. And I don't know if that's the entire new collection site or part of it or whatever. Anyway, so they've got some stuff going on with that. And then the other two that I think are of importance are the land use plan, one, and then the water and sewer. And they kind of tie together because they're looking at updating the land use plan. There was a draft put together by the staff, Deborah Ensminger and her staff, which was presented to the county in January of 2020, but it has never been adopted. And the thrust of that plan, in a nutshell, was to steer new development toward existing towns and then to protect the rural heritage of the rest of the county. And that way you wouldn't have development where there's already water and sewer, and then you don't have pop-up subdivisions that are on septic or that break up farmland. But it's too soon to tell at this point. And I also did call up Laura Williams, who's the clerk to the board and probably knows as much as any other human being up there what's going on. She doesn't know whether they're talking about doing a full rewrite or just tweaking that 2020 draft. She doesn't know whether there's going to be public input. But when we did our comp plan, we had a year and a half worth of work, and including various public input sessions and bringing in the county, for example, and stuff like that. So if they're going to be redoing their land use plan, that's important to us, and I think we ought to at least know what's going on and hopefully be able to put in a word for us. Water and sewer is a big part of that because they are looking to significantly increase the water and sewer infrastructure. So one of the comments that I heard a couple of times up there is that the water and sewer will drive their new comp plan. And for water and sewer, in addition to just that one day on February 9, where all the commission members were there and they went through all 8 or 10 of these focus areas and what they were thinking about doing with them. I also attended a meeting of just the Water and Sewer Task Force, which is Commissioner Pasterno and Commissioner Cook. There's only 2 commissioners on each task force, and there's no staff or anything. It's just the 2 of them. And they're going to be gathering information. And then they're going to come back to the full board to make a decision, which I hope they're getting help from staff somehow. But anyway, so at that water and sewer meeting, it was a lot of information, a lot of detail. I'm going to try and give a little summary. I don't quite understand it all. I'm just going to say, but they're looking at 3 focus areas, which are Seven Lakes, and then Vass, Eastern Moore Water District, and Highland Heights as one area, which is in the eastern part of the county. And the third one is Village of Pinehurst. And they're looking at them for growth. They expect this is where the growth is going to be, which is amazing to me when it comes to the Village of Pinehurst, because we're going to be built out pretty soon. Right? So, but
I
they're,
would guess it's a geographical area that's centered on Pinehurst.
I don't know, they're just saying
We're all
Pinehurst.
kind of this, part of the same sewer and water system, so.
Well, but they're planning out to 2052, and they're assuming that the Village of Pinehurst is going to have an increased population of, I think it's 1.5%, all the way out to 2052, which isn't,
So there won't ever be any annexations?
Say again, Jeff?
annexations, well, I don't know.
They won't have us,
So anyway, but they're also saying that both the Village of Pinehurst and Vass have water systems, water and sewer systems that are as old as 100 years old and have significant failures. And so they are doing a study of the existing infrastructure systems. LKC Engineering is doing it to see where that needs to be replaced, repaired, et cetera. Okay. So for water, they went through the available water sources they have now. And whether this is just for those 3 focus areas, I'm not sure. But anyway, they've got 6.8 million gallons a day coming in, including from wells in the village. Now, we've got a number of water wells in the village. They've just drilled 2 new ones out on the Linden Road. And I'm not sure whether those 2 are included in that 6.8 million. They said that each of those 2 new wells is producing 1 million gallons a day, which I hope is not sucking all the juice out of the farmland in our ETJ, but who knows. Anyway, they've projected that going out to 2052, looking at not just the average day supply needs, but the peak day supply needs, and adding in an industrial reserve in case of future commercial needs, they would need 11 million gallons a day, so 6.8 to 11 million. So where would they get more water? Well, there's 3 drinking water basins in Moore County. And one of them is Deep River Basin, which is north of 211. Then there's the Lumber River Basin, which is south of 211. And then over on the east side of the county, going into Harnett, is Cape Fear. And there are regulations if you take water out of surface water. This doesn't apply to wells. Surface water out of one drinking water basin and then put the wastewater into a different drinking water basin. So if that's happening, you have to get an interbasin transfer certificate, which is a big deal. The water to serve Vass, Seven Lakes, and the village would need to have one of those difficult certificates if it's coming from Deep River, but not if it comes from the Lumber Basin, Cape Fear Basin, or from Wells. So that's assuming that if you take the water out of Deep River and you don't return it there. Harnett County has enough water for all future needs, but it needs a whole lot of infrastructure to get the water from Harnett County, and that would be very costly. So they could expand the partnership with Southern Pines, which right now is producing a certain amount, and ask them to produce more, or they could partner with Robbins. And there's various other possibilities like Sanford. So then how much does all this count? How much does it cost? Phase 1 is a list of projects. They have American Rescue Act funds of 7.1 million. But this phase 1 plans are 7 million at least, and one project that they're working on is already $500,000 over that. So, and then there's phase 2, and so how would they pay for all that is a big question. And then moving on to sewer, and what I heard a number of times is that growth is going to go where the sewers are, not the water, the sewers. So there's going to, wherever they put the sewer in, there's going to be a growth corridor. Now, 211 is going to be widened out to 7 Lakes. And the DOT is going to put water and sewer mains under there. The sewer main under there would have to be a force main as opposed to a gravity main, which is less wonderful. But, and so they have to decide where the wastewater from that sewer would go. And there's apparently 3 alternatives. One is down Route 5 in the village to the new 18-inch sewer main in the golf course that they put in to fix the problem on Sugar Gum a year or 2 ago. And that they're not sure if it would be feasible to do that. I don't know feasible in what way, but they have to look at that. Another place is to put it down Hoffman Road through Foxfire. And the third thing to do would be to send it north to Robbins, because if they send it north to Robbins, then they could also take water from Robbins. They're going to have to refurbish their water and wastewater plants and stuff anyway, and they could do it all up in Robbins. So they're looking at that as a possibility. And they said that these decisions will drive the comp plan. The whole north end of the county is ripe for development if the infrastructure is there. So again, the question is where to get the money for all of this. And they're looking at what they called a Raleigh model for changing ordinances about to what extent developers pay for infrastructure. And I don't know what the Raleigh model is. I don't know how it works now either, which is very good on my part. But Randy Gould said to me, and he's their head of public works, that the towns should let the county know where they want to see development. So that's it. But there's a lot going on up at the county.
I think there is. And the task forces that they've set up, which we've been reading about, I'm sure, are, as Jane said, 2 commissioners, about 8 or 9 different task forces, I think. And they're trying to, it's partly being done to work with their planning, but also they have 4 new commissioners. and they're trying to get people educated as fast as they can. This is one of the ways they're doing it, according to Nick, whom I've talked a bit on this. But I think we need to be aware of certainly the water sewer issues, because they're going to be related to development. I'm a little concerned about the Pinehurst numbers that you mentioned, whether that's too aggressive or not, I don't know. Because if they're anticipating that we're going to grow at that rate, then what they're going to do with the other towns, I don't know. But I think it's important we do keep in touch with the county on this and watch what's happening in this task force particularly, let alone some of the others. So Jane's going to continue to follow this a bit, I think, and maybe we get some others involved as well. Jeff, Sam, are any information coming back from the county to the village right now about projections for growth or needs, water sewer needs? Nothing new from Randy Gould or anybody?
We're
Nothing
not
new.
hearing anything.
All right. Probably that's going to happen after these task forces are done with their work, which will be pretty quickly, I think. All right. That's the last of the notes I had as far as other topics. Is there anything else wants to be brought up at this time? Any suggestion for future updates from the work session?
I have one item. We can either bring it up next time or we can discuss it a little now. I think there's still unresolved the structure and governance of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee in the minds of members of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, okay? In a little bit, in my mind. And if I recall correctly, and Jeff, you maybe have the best memory on this, there were sort of three threshold issues. One was the delineation of the neighborhoods. Two had to do with this idea of an email other than the personal email that members of the NAC can utilize to communicate with their constituents, because they are subject to the Public Records Act as, I don't know if I'm using the right word here, agents, is that the right word? Agents of the village, if that's the correct word. So, and I'm trying to think of the third one, I don't remember it now. But I think we really need to, we've been at this for, about a year, and I think we need to resolve those issues and make an effort to fill out as best we can the vacant neighborhoods, and see if we can locate other people to become members of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. It's one of those few groups that we hear from a cross-section of our village residents, and I found it informative and useful when I attend those meetings. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to discuss it more here, or we want to put it on the agenda for next week. We have a Neighborhood Advisory Committee meeting next week or the week after.
Monday coming up. right?
Monday. So
Right.
anyway, that's what triggered it on my notes.
Jeff and I have talked about this. We're going to get it on the agenda. I think maybe Pat and I can work with you over the next couple of weeks, and let's say we bring it into the work session in 2 weeks' time. And that'll help lay the groundwork for what we can do before the end of by the summer. I think that would work. Okay. Pat, thanks for that. Any other issues, or do I have a motion to adjourn the work session?
Move to adjourn the work session.
That's a motion from Lydia Bosch to adjourn the work session. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff Morgan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Work session is ended. Thank you.